Joe Walsh here. If the Republicans can't sell tax cuts, then the Republican Party is bye-bye. We'll talk about it when Freedom returns at 5.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So, talked a little bit about left media. Morning Joe Joka, as well as O'Keefe's latest undercover video with the New York Times staffer spouting off, as you would expect her to, I suppose, from that perspective that emanates from the Gray Lady. Charlie Sykes, we played this last week. He had some observations about conservative media, him being a former, very popular conservative radio talk show host in Milwaukee. He had some observations on CNN about conservative media that he shared.
A lot of people on the right just simply, they look at conservative media as I mentioned this before, as their safe space. They don't want to hear things that rattle their confidence in this administration. And I think that it's very, very difficult. Like, I'm a former conservative talk show host, and I try to imagine what it would be like to be doing the show now with an audience that, frankly, does not want to hear it. So I do think, there are true believers out there. There are the orange Kool-Aid drinkers out there. But there are some people who I think have just cynically made the decision that if they want the clicks, if they want the rating, if they want to be able to stay within that conservative tribe, there's only one route, and that is to be a Trump rationalizer and defender.
For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Charlie Sykes, the book, How the Right Lost Its Mind. Charlie, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for inviting me on. This apparently will not be a safe space.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not a safe space for anybody, including us.
No, yes.
So we like to walk the wire, as it were. But here's the thing. One of the reactions I had to your interview with Brian Stelter, and part of which we played there, is, well, wait a second. There's another category that I think is being glossed over, and that's the category of people that say, look, I had great skepticism about Trump. I didn't like him when he was a TV personality. He was, perhaps my last choice or down to my last choice for presidential candidate coming out of the Republican primary. But he won fair and square. And then he was up against Hillary, and that was not acceptable, Hillary. So I, threw in with him because of policy considerations like Supreme Court nominees. And so now I'm in a position, which I'm describing myself, where I laud him for the policy choices with which I agree with that are consistent with my particular conservative philosophy. And I criticize him when he makes a poor personnel choice or says an untoward word or makes a policy decision with which I disagree. Why can't you be a conservative and be not a never Trumper and not a rationalizer or a Kool-Aid drinker?
You can be. In fact, I think that's exactly what conservatives ought to be doing. I think that they ought to, again, and I describe this in my book, what it means to be a contrarian conservative. If you're conservative, you're going to agree with many of the policies of the Trump administration. You mentioned the Supreme Court. And I respect people who figured, okay, I'm going to go into that voting booth. I'm going to hold my nose. It's a binary choice between Trump and Hillary, and I'm going to choose Trump. I understand that. I get that. What I was talking about there, though, was the people who, now that it's no longer a binary choice, do feel that it's their role to be a nonstop propagandist. And I know you have, I'm not going to be talking about your show, but I know there are other hosts that are on, stations like yours, including one whose show I've been on, who very openly says, my job is basically to support Donald Trump, whatever he does, who will make him a success. And unfortunately, I think that not only ill serves conservatism, but I think, and I really hope people take this point, I think you become, not you, but you become an enabler of the bad behavior. At some point, if you want Donald Trump to succeed, don't you think that other conservatives need to stand up a little bit of tough love and say, do you understand, Mr. President, that your erratic behavior, your chronic lying, the tweeting, the sort of bizarre throwing out of insults, all of these things are undermining what you claim to want to accomplish.
But still, I just can't wrap my head around the fact that Donald Trump was a Democratic donor. He was a Democrat. He was pro-choice. And then he made this conversion into being a Republican. And I always keep saying that he hijacked the Republican Party. And never in my wildest dreams would I think conservatives would embrace him.
Well, this of course is one of the ironies we always used to throw around this rhino, Republican in name only.
Right.
Literally, Donald Trump was a rhino. He was what we talked about all of these years. I don't know whether Donald Trump's a liberal or a conservative. I basically think that he's a man with no fixed principles, who has not thought long and deeply, who just simply wants to win. But I do think it's fascinating that those of us who felt that way have been consistent, have not changed, our position. I certainly haven't changed my position, but we're now being accused of that. Well, we have betrayed the cause. We, the Judases of the conservative movement, whereas folks who made a 180 and decided that somehow they were going to project all of their hopes and dreams on Trump, somehow now they have become the spokesman for conservatism. I think that's a mistake.
Well, I mean, and you make this point in your book that populism isn't conservatism, and this point I've made on this show as well. So I agree with that. But I mean, some of the Never Trumpers that, as a good piece by Victor Davis Hanson last week, that have sort of been exposed as, well, maybe they weren't exactly principled conservatives either. I mean, I think of Bret Stephens, who goes over to the New York Times from the Wall Street Journal, and after the Vegas shooting is talking about essentially significantly curtailing, if not suspending, the Second Amendment. Well, and this was VDH's point, well, maybe some of these people actually didn't kind of hold the views that they said they held, and Donald Trump has given them cover to come out with their actual views in opposition to Trump as being the cover.
Yeah, well, that's a convenient argument that he made, and I'm not going to talk about Bret Stephens' piece, because I think that although I have a lot of respect for Bret Stephens, I think he's dead wrong on the Second Amendment, completely wrong. Mm-hmm. But I mean, part of this is could we at least acknowledge that there is a stream of conservatism that was rejected during the primaries. That a lot of Trumpism and Bannonism is a very explicit rejection of the Reagan legacy. That a lot of the direction that many of us thought conservatism was going to go in terms of being small government, being concerned with civil liberties, engaged in focusing on personal responsibility, a lot of that, and also American exceptionalism and our role in the international community. What happened was a rejection of many of those values. So,
but let me.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Consider ourselves Reagan conservatives. We are still conservatives.
Yeah, but let me ask you this though: is it a rejection of Reagan conservatism? That's where I came of age too, so I appreciate that. Or is it a rejection of all of those Republicans since Reagan who invoked Reagan but didn't emulate him, and so grew government and introduced new entitlement programs, Medicare Part D under George W. Bush? And frankly didn't live up to the legacy that they were extolling, and so lost credibility.
Yes, absolutely, that's true. And I think that this is one of the problems that many conservatives and the Republican Party made promises that they could not keep. They overpromised. And then, of course, there was a sense of disappointment and betrayal that you saw playing out in 2016, and that's absolutely true. That's certainly part of the story.
Which presidential candidate were you backing, and how would the election of President Trump make you question your core values?
Well, in retrospect, I think I could have supported any one of those 17 guys that was on stage there at one point, 16 or 17 guys. Yeah. I think I probably would have ended up voting for Marco Rubio in Wisconsin. I actually voted for Ted Cruz and supported Ted Cruz and helped Ted Cruz win the Wisconsin primary. I certainly would have been quite happy to see Scott Walker, my governor, my good friend, as the nominee. But to watch a political party nominate a man so obviously unfit to be president of the United States, to watch them pivot on so many of those core values, made me realize, sit back and go, okay, I thought I understood what the conservative movement was about. I obviously didn't. I thought I knew what the conservative base, who they were, what they believed, what they would accept, what they wouldn't accept, and obviously I was wrong. And then watching the conservative media, who for many years had been the thought leaders and had been the gatekeepers of conservative belief, watching one after another of them flip over reject all of these other successful, principled, conservative candidates. We never had, it's such an impressive field. But watching them flip over for this billionaire con man, former Democrat from New York, was genuinely stunning, and it remains so.
Well, look, I mean, I started out as a Scott Walker supporter and then moved to Ted Cruz, so kind of similar travelers on that. I just didn't get to the place that you and, even Michael Medved, going all the way over to the idea of voting for Hillary to stop Trump.
I did not vote for Hillary.
Yeah, I just can't make that make sense. But now, assessing Trump, Roger Kimball had a good piece, and I think Roger Kimball's bona fides as a conservative intellectual are pretty impeccable. But he basically says, look, amid all of some of the silliness that you described fairly, Trump is nominating judges and justices who are strict constructionists. He's tried to move the flag on illegal immigration, developing America's energy resources, rolling back the administrative state, improving combat readiness for the military, attempting to simplify the tax code and reduce the tax burden. I mean, there are a lot of things that if you remove Trump from the list of agenda items, you would be supportive of, right?
Yes, except that you'll notice that you need to also step back and realize how unsuccessful the Trump administration has been so far in getting legislative reforms. I agree completely on the issue of the judges. But then the question is also, so what do you have to swallow to get those things? And I do caution conservatives that unless you give this administration tough love, you're going to be tainted by a lot of the other stuff, because there is a lot of the other stuff. And by the way, Roger Kimball's a guy who I think understands who Donald Trump is. In fact, I actually quote him from what he said last May. He said, for many of us, what is troubling about Donald Trump is not his particular view of policies, much though we might disagree with him, but rather the aroma of populist demagoguery and menace that surrounds him.
Yeah, right. No, I agree.
So
I
want lower taxes. I want to see rational environmental policies. But does that mean that I now need to pretend that Donald Trump is not a con man, that he is not somebody who is has, I think, lack of respect for the rule of law? Does that mean that I have to pretend that these other things are not happening?
But this is,
and that's part of the problem.
But this is this moral of the story. This is beyond Trump, and I know you make that point in your book that this is beyond Trump. It's just Trump is central because of he's the president of the United States and because of the 2016 cycle, obviously. But it's just the idea. Hey, don't fall in love with politicians. They're the means to policy ends. Every politician should have an accountability check on them.
Oh, Dan, you're absolutely right. I mean, the put not your faith in princes. That goes back a long time, and that's another part of what I think troubles me, and I think is a dangerous trend. Remember when we used to make fun of the Democrats for their cult of personality with Obama, and now of course we see the cult of the Donald Trump personality. I think that's a big mistake. Be with him when he's right, but don't be married to him. Don't basically say to the look. My concern is that all of these policies that you and I support are going to be toxified by Trump's erratic behavior and all of the other baggage he's bringing, so that we may get some wins over the next 18 months, maybe not, but for the next generation. How are conservatives going to be able to come back to young people, women, minorities, independent voters, and say, hey, by the way, that wasn't us. All that stuff from Donald Trump, that wasn't. We are somebody different than that. But in fact, right now, the Republican Party is owning Donald Trump. That is who, in fact, we have become. And I think we ought to look in the mirror and go, okay, I want these things, but how much of my soul am I willing to give up in order to get them?
Just one more question. There's a line in your book about kind of setting up how the right lost its mind, where you say, how have we gone from from Frederick Hayek to Sean Hannity? And isn't that a little? Well, I mean, it's more than a little cheeky, but because different people play different roles. We have a lot of intellectuals. I mean, there's only so many Frederick Hayeks and Milton Friedmans out there, and Sean Hannity plays a role as somebody that can kind of maybe synthesize, as do other talk shows, synthesize some foundational policies for mass consumption. this isn't a defense of Sean Hannity, he's just saying different people play different roles in the conservative movement. And so some are going to be intellectuals, but it's always been the case that, frankly, a lot of people know some of the lines and very few have read the books.
Well, okay, that is a snarky line, but I think there's a larger truth there, that we used to have thought leaders who actually thought, who actually went through and talked about the role of government and the relationship of the individual to the state. They were real thought leaders who were thoughtful. Now I think the conservative movement has outsourced its thought leadership to the loudmouth at the end of the bar, or shameless fanboys like Sean Hannity. So that's the point that I'm making. Who now determines what conservatives believe? Is it going to be thoughtful people? And by the way, there's another line there. How did we go from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump? How did we go from William F. Buckley Jr. to Ann Coulter? There's a genuine transition that this movement has made, and the people that we are listening to, and the contrast to who we used to listen to, but also the rejection of much of that tradition, and the people who have been in that long conservative tradition, how we are attacked and vilified, or that quote that you read before, that maybe we were all secret liberals in the past. I think this is a dangerous trend for Republicans, and I hope that people will step back before we go over the edge.
All right. He is former conservative radio talk show host for WTMJ in Milwaukee, the author of the book How the Right Lost His Mind, Charlie Sykes. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope to do it again. This was a great conversation, and they're lighting up the boards, as you can imagine.
Hey, thank you very much, both of you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.